Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Ian Small, and I hope to spend the next hour giving you some warmth and colour to a rather cold winter evening by telling you about some of the butterflies of Colombia, which, as you'll hear, is an amazing place for butterflies. And all of a sudden, my screen control isn't working. There we go. So this time last year, I gave a presentation about the butterflies of Peru and Bolivia. Well, this year we're a little bit further north in Colombia. And I visited Colombia at the start of 2024, at the end of January, beginning of February, just for a couple of weeks. So it wasn't an extensive trip. The trip wasn't specifically photographed on butterflies. We did quite a bit of traveling and we had quite a bit of bad weather. So I only saw a fraction of what the country has to offer. But nevertheless, I'm sure you'll agree by the end of the talk, there is an awful lot for it to offer. So Colombia sits right at the northern end of the Andes. And in Colombia, that range actually splits into three. Called the three different cordilleras, they're called in Colombia. And each of those has its own east and west facing slopes, so each with their own habitats. So where were we on our trip? Everywhere we went was relatively high ground. So we started off the capital is Bogota, and Bogota is in the valley, but is already at 2,600 meters, but the mountains round about are well over 3,000 meters. So some of the butterflies I'll show you come from there. The majority come from over on the western side of the western Cordillera at a site called Montezuma. Some of the others were more in the center of this, on the eastern side of the central Cordillera. And then also some of them you would see at the very north of the country, there's a rather isolated set of mountains called the Santa Marta Mountains that are completely separate from the Andes and are completely cut off from other mountainous areas round about. And so there's quite a few endemic species of butterflies and birds in that part of the world. So that was also somewhere that we visited. So why Colombia? Well, basically, Colombia is just an amazing place for biodiversity. There are more species of butterfly and more species of bird that you can see in Colombia than in any other single country in the world. And some of the numbers are just mind-boggling. So the last data that I've seen is from March 23, so wearing them for 2 years ago now. And at that point, they'd identified 3,904 species of butterfly in Colombia, which is 20% of all the species on the entire planet. You put that in perspective of Europe, where we struggle to get to nearly 500. And I won't depress you by telling you how few we have in the UK. I'm sure you're already aware. So why are there so many species? It's just an astonishing range of habitats, not just because of the different ranges of the Andes, but also in the other parts of the country that we didn't go to. You're much more down into the outskirts of the Amazon rainforest areas. And so you've got a whole different range of habitats and flora and fauna that occupies the habitats down there. So what's this presentation going to be? It's basically just going to be a series of photographs of butterflies. And I'm going to essentially go through them by butterfly family. Obviously, I only saw a fraction of the butterflies that this country has to offer, and there isn't time in an hour to show you even all the butterflies that I saw. But nonetheless, I hope I can show you representatives of each of the butterfly families, and certainly when we get to the biggest family, the nymphalids, then I've got representatives of each of the subfamilies of the nymphalids. So I hope that by the end of this hour, you'll have a real feel for just the variety and richness of some of the butterfly fauna that Colombia has to offer. So I'm going to start with the skippers. And here in the UK and in Europe, we have a relatively small number of skippers, but they are a huge family of butterflies. That I was reading the other day, there's 4,000 species of skippers on the planet. Well, Colombia has over 1,000 of those. Um, so the range and diversity, even among the skippers, is really quite staggering. And there are many forms of skipper that we just don't see in Europe at all. But I'll start off with a couple of, grass skipper type skippers, more the sort we're familiar with. And the Wayhydra on the right here was the very first butterfly that I saw uh, in those mountains above Bogota, well above 3,000 meters. And when I first saw it on the bush, I thought, oh, there's a nice little orange grass skipper. But it wasn't until I looked more closely and realized that it had this wonderful ruby eye. Uh, and ruby eyes are a characteristic of a subset of these of neotropical skippers, and it really adds a dimension to the appearance of the butterfly. And sometimes it's an aid to identification as to what the color of the eye is. And I've paired it on the left with another ruby eye, and this was a really striking little butterfly. Green-backed ruby eye here. And you can see not only is the eye this wonderful color, but the legs match, and not just the legs, but also the proboscis. Um, it's also a good chance to see just how long a butterfly proboscis is when you see that you work that out and see it's well over the length of the entire body length of the insect. So just how it gets curled up inside the butterfly is just something to behold. So just a couple of general comments before we go on then. So you'll see several images of butterflies apparently drinking from the surface of leaves. Um, that's because our guides were essentially baiting the butterflies by spraying the leaves with something rather noxious. They didn't tell us what it was, but it certainly smelled fairly noxious. You did not want to get it on your clothes. The second thing is that the labeling I've put on the slides here. You'll see that I've prioritized the Latin names, and that's simply because for many of the species that we saw, there is no corresponding English name. Where there is one, I've added it, as you can see. But this next skipper takes skippers to a whole other level, doesn't it? This Agara was just an awesome beast. Um, really striking with that lovely bright color and those really bold markings on the leaves. This is quite a stocky insect. It's not trivial in size. I think the wingspan we're talking about is 2.5, 3 centimeters. So it's a fair old size, and so really heavy. But actually, we didn't see it fly at all. It just sat on the leaf all the time that we were there, and obviously allowing these rather nice, chance to photograph it. Excuse me. Now, lots of skippers are blue or have blue coloration on them, and the saber tip on the right is one example of quite a large family of skippers, which all exhibit this sort of general shape and pattern, with characteristic white and pale blue lines. And the species themselves are distinguished by their just the particular pattern and color of the lines that they have. This particular species, the Pygmalion saber-tip, is fairly widespread in its distribution. So not just in Colombia, but fairly widespread throughout the neotropics. On the left is a skipper that's sort of pretty much blue all over. It's a really shiny blue metallic color almost on the wings, but also the blue coloration, on the body of the insect, just contrasting with that orange tip to the wings there. So again, just another note about the labeling on my slides here. So you see next to that name, there's a large red capital E. What I'm signifying by that is that species is endemic to Colombia. Otherwise, it won't be seen outside of Colombia. On some later slides, you'll see a lowercase e, and by that I mean the subspecies is endemic to Colombia rather than the entire species. And here's a couple of examples of where blue and purple coloration carries through. But these are examples of what we call bent skippers or bent wing skippers. If you see the front edges of the forewings are look as if they're curled over. Um, when I first saw skippers like this, I just assumed it was freshly emerged and the wings hadn't opened properly. But no, that's not the case. This is the way that they are when they're fully formed, and this is a category of skipper is the group of bent wing skippers. Um, why they've evolved this way is beyond me. I can't see how it offers any sort of ecological advantage to apparently have wings that look deformed like this. But clearly the butterflies thrive, so it clearly is no detriment to them. So all these bent wing skippers this general sort of patternation on the wings, the colours and the details of the pattern change, but they're all of this sort. And then another group of skippers is in the genus Mylon. Um, Two examples here, and all this genus have essentially this same coloration, just differing in the slight subtle differences in the actual patterning on the wings there. But all this muted color palette of browns and fawns and whites in each of the Mylon skippers. And getting paler again, these will be recognizable to you as looking very like our own grizzle skippers that we see in Europe, the Purgus family. Um, and until a few years ago, these were also thought of as being Purgus species, until the days of DNA analysis allowed that to be sort of clarified, and these neotropical ones were actually put in their own family of Burnsius. And rather than the English name is being grizzled skipper, they're all referred to as checkered skippers of various sorts. So you get two examples here, very similar with subtle differences in the markings between the species. And finally, among the skippers, just to give you a couple of examples of another shape form of skippers, and these are the long-tail skippers. And again, there are many examples of these. Several, like the brown longtail, are essentially brown in color. Some, there are several which have, a brown base, but have some white lines on them, and then the thickness and positioning of those white lines differentiates the species. Others, like the turquoise longtail on the left, have got much more bold markings on the wings, but also some blue or green coloration, often to the body, sometimes into the tail, sometimes running into the wings as well. Well, again, these can be really, really quite attractive, and quite large insects by the time you've added in the length of the tail. So moving on swiftly, as we have to, because we've only have an hour. The next group I'm going to visit, and visit only briefly, is the Papilionidae, the swallowtails and cattlehearts. And although there's notionally 69 species in Colombia, we were not in areas where they would predominate. So we saw, to be honest, very few. So a couple of examples of cattlehearts to begin with. And you can see that these are, fairly large brown winged insects. Like swallowtails, they are very active. They rarely rest with the wings closed. Very active. Often sit with the wings flapping, even when they're nectaring or taking salts or whatever they are from the leaves. But they often have these quite strong red markings on the body of the insects. Sometimes it's quite difficult to identify these because the wings are moving so much, and you sometimes need to see the upper side and get a clear picture of the upper side markings to differentiate. But I think I've got these two identified just from their underwing markings. And then we only saw two actual swallowtails. And this first one, the polydamas swallowtail, Batis polydamas, is again another dark-winged insect, very similar in style to the cattlehearts I've just been showing you, again with the sort of red markings on the insect's body itself, and I say in this case also around the margins of the hind wing. The upper side is essentially dark, apart from this ring of pale luneos that spans both the forewing and the hind wing. And the only other swallowtail that we actually saw on this trip was this one. Um, Again, another dark-winged specimen, but in this case, no red on the thorax, instead replaced by that lovely pattern of blue and yellow spots, and of course that lovely blue coloration right down the length of the insect's body there. Right, really, really rather attractive insect. This one was the exception to the rule, in that it stubbornly refused to open its wings at any point, and so we never actually saw what the upper side of the wings looked like. So moving on to the next family, the Perids, the mimic whites and sulphurs. We didn't actually see any of the mimic whites on this visit, but we did see a few other whites, for obviously, but perhaps the most exciting was this Catasixa. This family have the English name the Dart Whites, and they're all characterized by these wonderful underwing patterns, usually with a dark ground color with these dart-shaped yellow and white markings. And several of the Catasitas also have these red tufts, which seem quite out of place on the underside of these insects. But really very attractive insects, very attractive. And this is another of the endemic species to Colombia, one of the leptophobias. As you can see, it's they've got male and female on the same slide here. And in this case, the dark veining on the wings is very clear. Obviously, the ground color differs between male and female. But I hope you're able to see on your screens that the key thing about the leptophobia is they have incredible green eyes, which really almost shine, and really stick out. So as soon as you see those green eyes, you know what genus you're looking at. And this particular species seems to have extraordinarily long antennae. And here we have a different example of another leptophobia, this time with a pale ground color on the hind wing, but really showing that green coloration of the eye. Really quite striking, as I was saying. This particular species doesn't seem to have quite such long antennae, but it's nevertheless very attractive, despite the pale underwing. Just that very thin yellow edging all the way around just sets it off nicely. It's again, are really, well, like so many of these things, are really attractive insects when you see them close to. And of course, there are lots of little grass yellows, and they can be a pain to identify because the markings fade and the colors fade with the age of the insect. And so in order to be able to differentiate them, you really do need to be clear as to exactly what markings are where. And as you can see, even at the best of times with the fresh specimen, the markings can be faint. And so sometimes it becomes impossible to be 100% sure which species you're looking at. But rattling ahead to the lycaenids, we think of the lycaenids as the coppers, the hairstreaks, and the blues. But you'll notice that I don't mention coppers on this slide, and that's because they don't really exist in the neotropics, and certainly not in Colombia. In fact, the whole pattern of this family is very different in the neotropics compared to Europe, where we think of the majority as blues and a few hairstreaks. In the neotropics, the balance is way shifted in the opposite direction. So the numbers on the slides there tell you that in Colombia there's the best part of 500 species of lycaenid, but only 9 of those are actually blues. All the rest are hairstreaks. Again, just by the nature of the habitats that we were visiting, we didn't see very many hairstreaks, but nevertheless, one of them that we did see was this gorgeous green hairstreak, the Carla hairstreak, Aurora Carla. Uh, Seeing a green hairstreak is always special. When we see our own green hairstreak, it's always a special treat. I mean, any green butterfly is a treat in my mind. Um, but these are, this was lovely to be able to see this one. If anything, this was marginally smaller than our own UK green hairstreak, but it still had, in a similar way to our own, that sort of coppery edging to the wings, just really sets off that green color. Really sets it off. It's beautiful. And the Arawakis genus are among a group of two or three genii, don't know what the plural of genus is, which have this general pattern of really bold stripes. But notice that the stripes all point towards the tail end of the insect, so that really what they're doing is they're emphasizing a false head on these insects. So the spots are essentially pretending to be eyes, and the tails appear as antennae. So the whole insect has evolved to confuse a potential predator and to optimize the chance that the predator would strike at the wrong end of the insect and leave the head unaffected by that strike, allowing the butterfly to fly away. There are some subtle differences between the different species, and if anyone's curious looking at these, just look at the sharp edge to the orange on Tagarna here compared to the blurred edge to the orange on Lyncoides there. That's a sort of minor detail. It's the overall impression that one gets looking at these that's really very striking. And also very striking is the gold bordered hairstreak on the left here. This is an insect that's fairly widespread in the neotropics, but the gorgeous coloration. In many ways, it's almost the closest you get to a copper type coloring, within the Lycaenids, or certainly in my experience. But lovely markings, and when you see it with in the correct light and a reasonably fresh specimen there, that gold border really does shine and show off the insect to great advantage. On the right hand side, you'll see that the English name is mini streak, the pale mini streak, mini strymon. The clue is in the name. This is a tiny little hair streak. This was the only one that we saw multiple individuals of, but and this was probably the freshest specimen among those, and so you're able to see the details of the markings quite clearly in this fresh specimen. But again, just a delightful little insect, just delightful. And then just a couple of examples of the blues, the majority of which seem to always sit with their wings closed, so you never see the upper side of these blues, or very rarely indeed. Zizula on the left is another tiny insect, really, really small. The body length is way less than a centimeter, maybe 8 millimeters in the entire body length of the insect body. On the right is one of the Leptotes, the Cassius blue. The Leptotes genus is unusual in that it's actually globally distributed in various forms. We have one representative in Europe, to my knowledge, the Lang's short-tailed blue, Leptotes peritus. But this is the Cassius blue here, and this is probably one of the more common blues that one sees in the neotropics. So I'm going to move on now to the next family, the Rheodinids, the Metalmarks. And again, we're rather short of examples here in Europe. I think certainly in the UK, we've only got one. I think it's only one across the entirety of Europe. And in that case, it's the Duke of Burgundy, of course. But this whole family is essentially found mainly in the neotropics and in Asia. And so again, the numbers can be huge. Again, they're wearing on for 800 species in Colombia, which is mind-boggling. Why are they called metal marks? Because many of them have got incredible metallic coloring, as you will see. Uh, for example, this first one is just the most stunningly bright insect. Really quite, the contrast between that really shiny orange, yellow-orange coloration and the black background. It really is an utterly striking insect. I thought at first that I was seeing a day-flying moth, um, because there are quite a few examples of quite boldly marked day-flying moths in the neotropics. But no, this is definitely a butterfly, and it's one of the metal marks. And I was, the patterning is quite amazing, and you look at the pattern on the wings, and you realise there's a black line that runs down the centre of the body, but the sides of the body are themselves orange to match the patterning in the wings. So it's just, why these things evolve this way, one is just left wondering. But this is another of my personal favourites, another of the really brightly coloured metal marks. Rhetus dysonii, the pink sea booty mark. From the pink here, you can't quite see it. It's a C shape, but that's where the name comes from. These aren't excessively large butterflies, but they have this wonderful shape. The Rhetus family all have this lovely shape to them, and they are, just a delight to the eye. And the one of the nice things about the Rhetus is that more often than not, once they're settled somewhere like this, they let you get close enough to have a good look, and in this case, get a photograph of them. I mean, so often things that we used to things flying away, and you get frustrated at not being able to photograph them. But when you have something as beautiful as this that you can approach, it really is a joy and a thrill. And you can see that blue is a coloration that carries through many of the metal marks. Here's two examples of mesosemias, and there are many, many, many different mesosemias. The majority of which seem to be quite happy to sit on the underside of leaves most of the time rather than on the top. So I don't know whether we were just lucky, or what was going on here, but we saw several examples of this Mesosemia pacifica. And you can see there's quite a strong difference between the female and male forms of the insect. In fact, it was only recently I realized that that's what I was looking at, and was able to differentiate them that way. And you may recognize this, of course, from my title slide, and also from the picture of the advert that went out to members. This is another, obviously, blue metal mark, the shining blue Lasea agesilas. Again, just one of the most delightful insects to see. The female is a bit duller, more a sort of bluey grey color, but these males, they just shine when you get the light right. And notice how hairy they are around the wings here, and on the body. They're really quite striking. But one of the things that always strikes me as odd, if you never have something odd about a butterfly, is that, to my eyes at least, the color of the eyes on this insect just seems so out of place. You have this gorgeous blue insect with strangely yellowy green eyes, which just don't seem to fit. But it works for the insect, so who am I? But not all the metal marks rely on color. Some of them rely on have these geographic patterns in instead. And again, these two Boetis genus species, they're quite small, but they're very pale in color, and they're just relying on these geometric patterns. And at first glance, again, they look moth-like. But no, they are members of the metal marks. But when you come to the Anteros, genus, then you're into a different league of butterfly altogether. Um, all the members of the Anteros genus are just gobsmacking is the only word that comes to mind when one sees insects like this. They are stunningly attractive. Um, they all have these hairy legs um, for reasons known only to themselves, and they often have really quite just intricate markings on them. Not all, but some certainly do. And I do hope that your screen is able to pick up that within these red markings here, that the centers are sort of shining blue metally color, sort of metallic blue in those centers. Um, See, we saw several examples of this species, and this was by far the freshest. Um, and so it just a delight. Um, and much to our surprise, just about 10 feet away from this one was another one. Quite different, as you can see. This one was much smaller, um, but much more delicate in its form. But that amazing contrast between the very pale ground color and those black markings, um, you know, white hairy legs with black feet. It just the whole design of the insect is just stunning. Again, with this sort of orangey smudge here. Now, and in this case, going back to my earlier comment about eyes, I think the eyes work really well in the Anteros species. They all have this pale yellow eye with one dark pupil, although there are some other, less obvious darker spots in the eye there, but one particularly dark compared to the others. But this is whoever designed this, I take my hat off to them. Just unbelievable. As I said, I used all as a word to describe these before, but you're just your jaw drops, and you think, why? How has nature arrived at this? And all you can do is just enjoy and be grateful that it has. So now we come to the largest family. I've been through all the others. Now we get to the nymphalids, which is the last family. But as you can see, the nymphalids are broken down into a very large range of subfamilies. And so I'm very quickly going to walk my way through examples of each of these. So I'm going to start off with the satyrs, the browns as we would think of them. And in the neotropics, many of these are high altitude specialists. And so up in the higher reaches of the Andes, you'll find lots of different sort of satyrs. And several of them have these unusual shapes and patterns. So Steroma, for example, it's almost like camel humps, on the back here, in the way that they sit, and an irregular shape on the tail, obviously very cryptic markings. And similarly, Diadalma here, we've got there's a similar echo of a hump here, the way it sits, and uneven shapes on the hindwings. Obviously, when these sit on a green leaf, they stick out like a sore thumb. But when you put these down on the ground at those altitudes, then they just blend in and disappear. It's really quite remarkable. Another high altitude specialist in the satyrs are these Corades satyrs, and they are unusual in their shape. You can see they have this lovely elongated shape to the wing pans, and there's I'm not sure the words to describe it, but almost a shell-like patterning on the underwings, which is really attractive. The upper sides often have really bold colours, but when the wings are closed, as they are here, then the butterfly can blend into a normal background, as I say, with the exception of when it sits on a leaf like this. Just an example of the difference between wings closed and wings open. This is not a Corades, of course, it's a Laciophila, but there's huge difference between now you see me, now you don't, in some of these species is really quite staggering. I was really quite shocked when I realised that these were actually the same species. In fact, in all likelihood, it's the same insect. They were just sort of 10 feet apart in where they were photographed. But this Oxyoschistus, there is no hiding going on here, is there? There's no camouflage, not to my way of thinking anyway. But the colours on the upper side there are just stunning. Those markings are so bold. It was a fairly dull day when we came across this, and it sat there with its wings open, and that red just shone, almost luminous, really quite staggering. And then, fortunately for us, it closed its wings. Yeah, and we were able to do this wonderful underside pattern as well. So just a really striking insect, really nice. And just a couple of more examples from a high altitude satyrs. On the left, you see just what looks like a wonderfully intricate, rich mix of colours. But when you place the insect amongst dead leaves on the ground, you can see that the colour palette is almost exactly matched by where the butterfly is going to be sitting a lot of the time. So one can see it closely, you can see all this intricate detail, but you step back a few feet and in poor light, then the butterfly will disappear from view very easily. Got another example on the right of when a butterfly wants to be noticed, when it opens its wings. Another example of really bright orangey red colours being used within these satyrs for that purpose. And these are just a couple of examples of more lower level satyrs, which are usually a rather different form and patterning. So the Satyra trigetis tiesa on the left-hand side here was one of the larger satyrs, but it had a lovely sort of almost velvety texture was the way it appeared. Clearly wasn't, but that was just what the appearance conveyed, these lovely warm colours. And the one on the right here, I just put in as an example of one of many small little brown job satyrs which flit around at lower altitudes. But classified within the satyrs are two subfamilies. The first of which is the Brasilinis, which go by the English name the owls. And why are they called the owls? Well, that's because the butterflies they're crepuscular and that they start to fly when it gets dark. And they spend most of the day sitting around perched like this one. Now, these are large butterflies. This one probably has a wingspan of the order of 5 inches or so. So think of the palm of your hand, and then imagine that's the butterfly. So because they sit around most of the day, they need their own way of deterring predators. And the owls do this by having these huge eyes, on in the underwing patterns, so that if a predator sees that, it's going to be very much deterred from coming anywhere near. Well, that's the idea anyway. And it seems to work because you often do see these sitting in apparently relatively open positions. But we saw a second one just a few days after the first. This one was a smaller example with a sort of slightly warmer color palette to the patterning, and the eyes weren't quite so big, but nevertheless the impression is still very much the same, that there's somebody is looking at you, and therefore don't go near here. What really very, very striking butterflies. But a similar sort of size, the other subfamily of the satyrs are the morphos. Now, more often than not, morphos you will see flying but not sitting. Very occasionally, when you're lucky, you get one to sit down. We were lucky. This is obviously a male sitting there. It is just gorgeous. This is it's an endemic Colombian subspecies of the common blue Morpho heleno. But in this case, there are some extra markings right around the edge, some extra white marks, and the blue coloration is two-tone in this subspecies, rather than being a sort of uniform blue across the wings. But just it phenomenal to have one of these come and sit down in front of you. It's a very rare occurrence when that happens. But we just got over the shock of that when it decided to close its wings, and the boldness of the markings on the underside of that insect were just. I come back to the word gobsmacking again, because I can't describe it in a better way. It was just unbelievable. Just the complexity, the brightness. Obviously, this is a very fresh insect that doesn't appear to be very many scales out of place. But the red edges, the boldness of the orange rings, everything was just perfect. So just take your breath away when you're fortunate enough to experience one of these in the wild. So the next subgroup within the nymphalids is the Epiturinae, which we think of as the emperors. So the same family as our purple emperor here in the UK. We only saw one example from this family, Boxicopa pavon. So it's a bit smaller than our purple emperor, but you can see that the jizz is analogous to our familiar purple emperors, in that when the light is right, they have this wonderful purple sheen on the upper wings. So really delightful insects. The underwings are much less conspicuous for obvious reasons, I think. But the next group are the Nymphalini, the true brushfoots. And this is a relatively common example, the rusty-tipped page, which is a lovely little insect. Well, not so little, to be honest, because we're talking, I don't know, 3 inches of a wingspan, 7.5 centimeters. Lovely bold orange tips to the wings, contrasting with the rest of the coloration there. And this particular specimen was relatively fresh. You can see the lovely blue markings just around the tail, and just blue dots in places and round the head. But this genus Cypruetta has another member which many of you will be much more familiar with, which is this one, Cypruetta stellinis, the malachite. So this is a species which, if you've ever visited a tropical butterfly house in the UK or elsewhere, you're almost certain to have seen this flying around there, because this is a species that's relatively easy to breed, and hence almost all these tropical butterfly farms breed this and have this in there. But to see these flying in the wild, it is something special, and they are truly delightful insects. Similar size to the rusty-tipped page that I was just mentioning. And a couple of examples of the group known as the beauties, more often found sitting on the side of a tree trunk, head down. But the beauties nearly always have these very intricate patterns of stripes and whorls on the underside. Now, these two examples, it happens, are from the same genus, Colobura, and so they're very similar indeed, with just minor differences in the patterning of the lines just in this outer segment here. You'll see a bit of a difference between the two in there. But there are many examples of the beauties, but these were the two that we happened to be able to photograph on this trip. And the Hyphanartia genus go by the collective name of the mapwings. And they have that name simply because of the intricate patterns on the underside of these butterflies, which can be really quite beautiful. The upper sides generally similar, marginal differences in color and the dot patterning, but just by sod's law, I wasn't able to get an upper side and the top side of the same mapwing on this trip, so that these are two very closely similar species. So the next group, the Cyrestinae, go by the English name of the dagger wings, and you can instantly see why. See these amazing sort of dagger tips to the tails on this orange dagger wing, Marpesia baranea. In this case, the upper side is this striking orange color. When it closes its wings, it's much more discreet, much less obvious. But again, when it's sitting like this, you can really see the length of those tails and where the dagger wing name comes from. Another example without an English name, it's darker orange color with this much stronger pattern down the middle. But in this case, the underwing has this striking difference between the white, on the inner half, and then completely different on the outer half, with this almost saw-like marking down the two. So, why that's evolved like that, I would love to know. Because presumably the butterfly sits with its wings closed somewhere, and so one assumes that this offers some sort of blending into that habitat. I would love to know where that might be. A couple more examples. The Corinna on the left here is taking that orange color. It wasn't satisfied with just oranges, so it's added blue in as well. And just to show that not all the dagger wings are brightly coloured, there are 3 or 4 species which have this much duller pattern, if you like, of dark browns and light browns and white spots. In this case, the spot-banded dagger wing. There are 2 or 3 others. The next group, the Limonididae, are the sisters, the Adelpha genus, and there are again many examples of these. I think Colombia itself has at least 30 species of Adelpha. And this example, you'll see in a moment, is unusual in not having orange on the upper wing. But the underwings all have this wonderful pattern of stripes and sometimes odd other shapes, but really bold markings of whites and orange and blacks. It's really attractive insects. But the top sides can also be incredibly attractive. And they all differ subtly or otherwise in the patterning of the orange and the white. And so one has to be really quite careful in getting a good look or ideally a photograph to be able to determine which species is which, because sometimes the differences can be quite subtle. And as in this example, we're all in white lines, we've got white dots, but when you look more closely, the white dots are round in the bottom right, but they're more oval in the other species, which also has a slightly different shape to the orange markings of the forewings. So again, the nature seems to have evolved to fill all the different options of shapes and colorations in the Adelphas. I say there's a huge variety there. Moving on to the Ithiomeinae, the clear wings, not all of which have clear wings. But one thing they do all have is black stripes, vertical stripes down their eyes, which is a good way of telling whether it's in this group or not. But this is a rather nice example. I was struck by the fact that the antennae are white, for the outer half. It seems to literally stick out like a sore thumb. But there are many examples of this family with this general pattern of orange coloration and a variety of patterns of white dots on the outer wings. And one has to look carefully to work out what it is that one is seeing. So this next example, that there's much less orange, but we're not quite clear yet. But what we have is a much more opaque set of markings, within the wings, but still not quite transparent. And then an example where they really are transparent. You see looking side on and looking down on the wings of this Oleria. You can see that in this case, the orange goes right round the hind wing on the underside, but is only present in the tail portion on the upper side. And the orange band here is completely hidden, from the upper side. Also of note is that the wings aren't entirely clear and that they have these white or opaque patches in them. And again, that's often important in terms of identifying and distinguishing one species from another, the extent to which there are those markings. But the example on the left here, that this Ithymia, I was just blown away with just the brightness of this. Yes, the wings are not transparent, they're opaque, but look at that orange and yellow veining. I was completely unaware that any of these species had this characteristic. And so when you add that into those bright orange tips to the antennae, this was just the most striking insect, right? Absolutely stunning. And in contrast, just to show that there are, then this is an example in the Scadazibia, where there's no coloration in the wings at all. The only orange being in these patches just behind the head here. So we now move swiftly on to the Charaxes, the Leafwings. Again, we've only got one example in Europe, which is the two-tailed pasha. But in the neotropics, again, they're quite a common species, but they're often canopy dwellers. And more often than not, you'll see them flying around the canopy, but they're only attracted down to things that are rather noxious. So in this case, we were fortunate, and there was some fresh dung which had attracted down this gorgeous one-spotted prepona. And as you see, there's that lovely pale blue stripe across the wings of this prepona. And often that's all you see as they fly in the canopy, they twist and turn, and you just see this blue flash as they go past. So you know you're looking at a prepona, but as to which one, you can't tell unless you're fortunate enough and you're able to get close to one that's come down for something. And we were fortunate because a second one, a different species, also came down. And again, you can see that similar gorgeous blue line across the forewings. Again, I hope you can make out on your screens that in this case, the blue is actually two-tone again. So there's a darker blue edge to the blue here and a paler blue for the main part of the body. But in this case, the underside of the insect is this lovely, again, two-tone pattern. So this occurrence of two-tone patterning in the underwings seems to be not unusual in insects in this part of the world. But many of these Charaxes they're leaf mimics. They're designed to be able to disappear among leaves, frequently dead leaves. And at this example here, you can see you've got same species sitting on a dead leaf where it almost disappears, and you can see that the color palette that the insect has got and all those little dots all over the surface essentially match the leaf that it happens to be sitting on here. And I was particularly struck with several of these Memphis species. Notice how much the head is here, but how difficult is it for you to see it? The antennae are tucked against the body so they don't stick out. The eye has exactly the same color, ground color, as the body of the insect, and again has lots of little dots over it to make it just blend in and not stick out. And like when you see them against a green leaf and they happen to open the wings, you can see that there are often some quite bright and often blue coloring on the upper wings. But you take a Memphis like that and you take it away from its camouflage habitat, and wow, don't they stick out like sore thumbs on green leaves? But again, you can see the wonderful leaf shape here. So it's a gorgeous leaf mimic. And again, see what I was saying about the eyes and how that just blends in. And similarly with this one, the Memphis Laura, the eyes, same coloration as the body here. I would love to know where these insects roost because those colors were stunning. And so where they must roost must be of that coloration, otherwise they would not have evolved this way. Moving on to second last grouping now, the heliconids, the longwings, and just among the longwings are the actinotes, and they're a little bit odd in that they're very dark insects, the actinotes, but some have this really quite bold markings on them, and in particular this lamplight actinote, it's essentially a dark navy blue insect, but with two really bright red lights sort of shining out from those wings. Presumably, it must, to other insects, look like the eyes of something glowing. And so that it must be acting as some sort of deterrent to predators, I assume. But more standard sort of long wing shape. An example is the Juno long wing here, and you can see just the general shape of the insect as it sits is very different from most other insects. But the Dione genus is lovely in that there are several examples, but they all have this very similar pattern of silvery white markings on the underwings, which can be really very attractive indeed, very attractive. And these are both the same species, but they're two different subspecies of that species that we happen to see in different parts of Colombia. So the one on the bottom right, we only saw on those isolated Santa Marta Mountains. However, both of these subspecies are more widespread than that. So I think it was just happenstance that we saw them in different places. But same species, this lovely blue sheen to the wings here. And in one, the white lines join together, where the other one they're separate, and that one also has this white tail. And the tails, the underside, also share those patterns. One other example with a blue sheen, but more of a blue marking on the upper side, this time combined with a sort of red front to back stripe, Heliconius malpomene. Again, just examples of the range of insects that one can see. And so we move into the last grouping, called the tropical brushfoots, and some of the examples here are again, I hope you'll agree, are rather lovely. Starting off with this epiphyli, no English name for this particular species, but the epiphyles often have the English name banner, associated with their English name. But this was bold and bright. It was described to me by somebody as a red admiral on steroids. I think you can probably see why that might be the case. And just a absolutely gorgeously bright, bold, attractive insect. The crackers are another lovely group, which more often than not you will find head down on the side of a tree. Name comes from the fact that the males can crack their wings. I've read about this many times, but I've yet to witness it in the field, despite having seen many crackers over the years. The Dynamines are always referred to the English name as sailor, the various sailors. So we saw 2 or 3 examples in Colombia. They generally have very pale blue upper wings, contrasting with these bold markings and bright colors of orange and white and blue and black on the underside. And in this case, you can see that patterning has sort of shone through and somewhat detracted from the pale blue of the upper wing, which is unfortunate, but that was the way the light was. Another example, which is a slightly darker blue ground color on the upper side, and less that's where less contrasty markings on the underwing help to retain that, of course. In this case, the blue sailor. And I've always been very fond of the Pyrogyra family, the English name of red ring. Again, why is it a red ring? Because there's a red ring that runs round the part of the underside of the insect here. Again, lovely, attractive insects, but notice how the color of the eyes is picking up exactly the same color as that red ring. And looking at the top side here, you can see how bold the eyes are, but notice that they're echoed down here. And these white lines seem to point in this direction. So again, I wonder whether this is another, another tactic that has evolved, so that a predator will strike at this end, thinking those are the real eyes, and hence the insect will escape from that attack. But we saw a few 88s on this trip, not many, but this was the one we saw most frequently. Again, unfortunately, no English name that goes with this one. This is Dieithria euclides rather. In some of the examples there, this was more of a 9, and in 89 it became, whereas this was more like a ghost, that was sitting next to the 8 there in many cases. But in all of these, the contrast between the patterning of the underwing and the really dark ground color of the upper side is very striking. And in this case, with this just a fluorescent flash of greeny blue when the light is right. These two calicores were rather nice. I particularly liked the one on the left, the Calicore Leica, because I hope you can see the color of the eyes on this insect. That blue is just echoing the blue in the spots here and the blue around here. So it just, the overall impression that it gives is just a gorgeously attractive insect. But then again, so is this. This is another calicore, the two-eyed 88. But the warmth and beauty of the underside of that insect is just stunning. Again, just beautifully warm coloration and contrasting with the black and the blue. It just, again, take your breath away. Just absolutely delightful. And then not an 88 to finish, but this Catonephile has the English name, the stoplight catone. So that's my signal. That's my stoplight. That's the end of this whirlwind tour around some examples of the butterflies of Colombia. So I hope I kept you warm and interested for the past hour. Thank you for your attention.
Wow, that's amazing, Ian. I just gobsmacked to see all those butterflies. Quite extraordinary. But right, let's see if we can get some other people. Let's start. Cool. Right. Well, I guess if you're happy to take any questions, Ian, I don't know if there's anyone would like to ask a question, or if you can unmute yourself and ask one, or whether we've got any questions in the chat, Liz, you'd like to ask.
Yeah, my computer's very slow this evening. Well, that first question was from Malcolm. He wants to go there. So how much is it going to cost to go to Colombia? Well, I did a quick search online, and there does appear to be a few companies offering this sort of holiday. They weren't too cheap, but I'm sure Malcolm can find one. Mark Bridges says stunning, and also says wonderful, thank you. Chris Earnshaw says what a fantastic talk. And Rosalind Stewart says the biodiversity of the butterfly species in Colombia, 20%, you said, is an incredible statistic. I must admit they are pretty amazing. I know that Ian's talk's always really good to start off this program. And I know he has been to a few more countries since Colombia, so we've got another talk lined up for next spring. Then here we go. Any
Oh,
hint,
Laura's going to Colombia. I'm really jealous now.
yeah, any hint of how many more species there may be to be discovered there? This is Michael Hammerson.
Um, Difficult to know, obviously. It's like an exponential curve, so we don't know where we are on that curve. All I can say is that the data I quoted was from March 2023. The previous set of data from the same group of people was dated, I think, 2 or 3 years earlier, and there were 200 fewer species.
Right, okay. Dee says amazing, thanks. Now we've got one from Richard Stevens. This is Fab talking. What camera and lens do you use?
What I was using on this trip was the camera is a Canon EOS 5R. Is that right? Mental block on my camera.
We don't know.
Bear with me a moment.
Talk amongst yourself. Ian has just gone to find his camera. For
Yeah,
those.
EOS R5. Sorry, got the lettering the wrong way around. And I actually use, a lot of people use macro-type lenses for this sort of thing. I find that doesn't work for me because I also like photographing birds and things that are much further away. So I actually use a long lens. So I'm using a 1 to 500 mm lens frequently at the long end of that. But it does mean that I can photograph these insects from a reasonable distance away, so that there's much less likelihood of disturbing them. There's that, but also you often can't get that close to them because of branches in the way or whatever else, or the ditch or something like that. So
I assume it's quite heavy though.
it's quite heavy. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right, Rosalind Stewart, question. Is Colombia losing any of its butterfly species, brackets, due to climate change, pesticides, or other causes?
I honestly don't know the answer to that. I think one of the saving graces at the moment is that it Colombia is a large country. It's about 6 times the size of the UK, but the population is less than that of the UK. So because a lot of this habitat does not lend itself to agriculture, then nature is left. Plus, the country is very proud of its biodiversity, and so it encourages that to be retained. And obviously, the more people who can visit as eco tourists, if you like, then the more money goes into the country. That way, then that encourages habitats being maintained.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Priscilla,
I think I just add to that. I think it like all South American countries, it is suffering from deforestation of parts, but it's not one of the worst ones. I don't think. In fact, the big international biodiversity convention, the COP15, was actually held in Colombia, and the Colombian government hosted it. So I think compared to some of the other horrific governments in South America, they're relatively good, but that's not to say that there isn't habitat being lost. But it's not one of the worst.
Certainly not on the scale that we've heard about Brazil and the Amazon
No.
recent years. Yeah.
No.
right, Priscilla says thank you, interesting talk. And then Michael Hammerson asks again about the habitats. To what extent are habitats protected there? So it's following on from the earlier questions.
I don't really know the answer. I know that we visited a number of reserves, but just the extent to which the country is protected like that, I couldn't put a number on it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think a lot of these countries, things are protected on paper, but in practice, things can be very different because it's almost impossible to police. So
yeah,
I think the general environment is better than probably the most of those those sort of countries.
Yeah.
I've got an answer to a question that Ian posed earlier, which
Ooh.
is the answer is genera, which is the plural of genus.
Oh, of course it is. I just had a mental block.
So
Thank you.
Right. I think the questions seem to have finished. I don't know if anyone actually wants to ask a question, if they want to put their hand up or come off mute and show their faces. If you are planning to come to Sunday's egg hunt at Stafford Road, Ruislip, we do need to know that you're coming. There's a couple of meeting points. One is by the station and one is actually on site. But the weather is looking fair, but so that Nick doesn't leave you at the station by mistake, please let us know if you're going to be coming.
yeah. I had a weather update from St Albans. It's been snowing while Ian's talk's been on here.
Oh, is it? Oh, well.
Not a lot,
Says,
but a bit.
thanks so much, inspiring. So, as I've booked you in for next year. So, hopefully, he went. I'm not going to say where he went earlier a few months ago, but he has got another collection of photos. In the meantime, I go abroad, but I manage about 2 or 3 butterfly pictures, and none of them are worth publishing. But hey ho, that's life, isn't it? But I think we're nearly there up, Malcolm. So I don't know whether you want to sign off and.
Yeah, well, I think I said everything I needed to say at the start. Thanks to everyone that's stayed to the end. I think we've still got most people's, which is a good sign. So yeah, just a reminder: the next talks on the 28th. You do have to register for that one on Eventbrite, but all the links are all on the emails we send round and on the events page of the branch website. If you'd like to find out all about the Butterflies of London. Can't promise they'll be quite as good, but at least our purple emperors are bigger, and we've got a copper. Even if Colombia have got 100 times more different species than Herts of Middlesex.
Yeah, there's a lot of people signing off and saying thank you, Ian.
Great.
So I think that's generally everyone's opinion. It's brilliant. And Ian has survived, I think, without coughing because he's not been 100% fit.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's a big relief.
I think if we'd told you beforehand, you would have certainly had a coughing fit, but he's done really well.
Great. All right. Well, thanks all. Thanks for coming. And
Yeah.
we'll
Bye-bye, everyone.
see you again soon.
See you
Yeah.
Everybody.
Take care. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.